Okay, let's continue. Father John, over to you.
Sure, I'll just share my screen if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name is Father John. I'm just a monk at a monastery outside of Sydney. So the topic is basically the life and miracles of Saint rueiss and Pope Matthew the first of Alexandria. I put the second before. Sorry, I meant to put the first. Just a bit of background. So when I was in Egypt last year or the year before, I was just going through some of the manuscripts to maybe try to find the topic. And one of the manuscripts that caught my eye was this one. And they're together. They both and the Coptic Church, we call them Saint rueiss and Pope Matthew the First of Alexandria, the 87th Pope of Alexandria. That manuscript caught my eye, and I thought that might be a worthwhile topic, and especially because they have a lot of spirituality behind it. They're a bit famous, but they're not as well known in the English in the English side. Like most of the stuff is just in Arabic. And I was talking to a professor in Japan who did like research on Saint rueiss, and she's not even Coptic Orthodox, but it was pretty interesting. And she was encouraging on this topic, but her dissertation is in Japanese. But she said she's working on a bit of an English translation. There's not that much. There's not that much on this topic in terms of English, so I thought it'd be worthwhile. And we'll just go through some of those things. So we just go to the contents, introduction, just an overview of the paper. Okay, so introduction. This paper will begin. We'll just read a bit of it with an incomplete biography of Saint rueiss and Pope Matthew the First, followed by some of the miracles recorded in their lives. The paper will then take the approach of analyzing their contributions to the Coptic Orthodox Church at the time and present, while also attempting to detail analyze aspects of their lives that have never really been explored and certainly been available to English readers through the Arabic manuscripts. And I guess what's the goal of this dissertation is to make various analysis of both hagiographies, both meaning those two personalities, Saint rueiss and Pope Matthew the First, more accessible to both scholars and the general public, particularly those interested in Christian or Coptic spirituality in the Middle Ages. So they're both in the 13th, 14th century. And also anyone interested in the history of the Alexandrian patriarchs and monasticism in general, because of course in the Coptic Orthodox Pope has to be a monk. And another secondary goal includes providing discussion and commentary on the literary and historical heritage of these Arabic manuscripts. And finally, the English, just move this out of the way. The English translation and edition of these manuscripts have not previously been done in the past, as far as I'm aware. Like I said, the Professor Osaka did it in Japanese. There's not that much available in English, and hope to provide renewed access to the Western and Eastern churches, because I mean they're unknown in the as far as I'm aware in the Western and Eastern churches. They're not really well known. About these two figures in the Coptic Orthodox Church, and I know that transliterations were provided. I hope so anyway. Okay, so who is Saint rueiss? So we'll just cover him briefly. So we have icons of him, and the Orthodox Church uses icons, and that's just a couple of pictures of him. This is why I wanted to do a PowerPoint, so you can just see it. So, and they even write They write that in Coptic abba TG, and that's like one of his names. It's a bit confusing how many names he might have. And even one other name is he could be Theophanios. That's in Greek. And you'll see if anyone read the bit of the paper or knows anything about this this father. He's always surrounded by a camel, and if anyone reads it, you find that why. So, I mean, what I covered again, it was just very brief biography of it, but I think it is a worthwhile topic because it's not available and it's quite a fascinating story. And I also believe, and my argument is that both, because they lived at the same time, Saint Rueiss and Pope Matthew I, they're contemporary of each other, and they do have a couple of interactions with each other. And I even remember one of the fathers in Egypt talking about, he like looks after some history section in Egypt, and he says he just gave like a talk on this like a month ago, and he said they always find the picture together. And I got one picture of that. We'll talk a bit about his early life. So just very briefly in the paper, it gets into...
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, go ahead.
Father John. We're not seeing those images. We're just stuck on the first page of your PowerPoint.
Okay. You can't see... Can you see the words at least?
We can see the words.
Okay. I'm not sure. Do
you want to click to the page you want us to see?
You mean you're not on this page? Is that what you mean?
We're just on page 1.
Okay. Maybe start again quickly. Can you see the next page?
No.
Okay. I have no idea why.
Okay.
Maybe I'll stop share and try it again if you want.
If you enable editing, you should start it.
Say that again, please.
If you enable editing under the toolbar.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I clicked enable editing. Got it. I'll try it again. Sorry about that. How about the second slide now?
Yeah, it's a different slide. Yep, but
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that's the third slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Now you can see the picture.
No.
Anyway, what do you want me to do?
Well, if we can't see the visuals, maybe there's not much.
You can see the slide now, right? The words. Is that correct? Okay, so start again. You can hear me? Yes?
Now we can.
Now you can see the image?
Yes.
Okay, no problem. I'm sorry for that, whatever I did. I guess so what I was saying with the images, so Saint Rueiss, he's got other names, and has the abba Teji, and if you read the text, it kind of means like he was crazy, and you find that him and Pope Matthew, especially before he was like a pope, they both kind of were like, and my argument is they were both like fools for Christ. They did some crazy things to try to, the argument is to disguise their righteousness, to avoid vainglory. And a lot of saints, at least in the Coptic Orthodox Church, they're famous for that. But to other people, it sounds very extreme, especially if you read any of the parts that of the manuscript. It's quite extreme. and the other word was here theophanios, which is like God who appears. So he received. The argument is that he received revelations because he was a righteous person. So we'll just talk about, if you can read bits and pieces about his early life, and what he's most famous for probably is he's always surrounded by a camel in the icon. And if you read it, because he used to work as a farmer with his dad, and he had a camel who would transport salt, and he took the name of the camel. So his original name was Freg, but he wanted to put the name of camel, which is rueiss, like from the Arabic word like head, ras. And it was during the time of persecution in the 13th and 14th century in the Coptic Orthodox Church. There was lots of persecution in Egypt. And so Pope Matthew the First was, like we said, he was contemporary with him, was involved in trying to calm down the situation. So he was a bit political, Pope Matthew the First. And he received visions, like we were saying, and he would travel around, a bit like Pope Matthew, he would travel around from monastery to monastery. And the argument is, again, to disguise his righteousness, to avoid vainglory. And I put one of the visions on the paper, and it says, "You are weary and hungry." He saw a vision. Two men appeared to him. "You are weary and hungry. Come partake of the bread of life." The bread of life being Holy Communion. So that was translated from the manuscript. It's very interesting. They're like it's quite extreme examples. They were very famous for their asceticism, but the argument is that both him and Pope Matthew were famous for their asceticism in terms of like food, what they ate, what they drank, what they wore, or what they didn't wear. They didn't wear much clothing. And like how much sleep they would give to them, and where they lived, and where they would live. So if anyone read the bit of the paper or a bit of the manuscript, you'll see that it's detailed a bit more there. Like a couple of examples where he fasted, when we say fasting, like abstinence for like 20 days, not eating for 20 days, and not drinking water in the summertime for periods of time. And you can see the similarity to Pope Matthew. I don't think I put in there, but he would fast 2 days at a time, meaning abstaining in the summer, and winter 3 days at a time, fasting abstinence. So the extreme habits and asceticism, Holy Communion, that's in the manuscript as well, about his reverence for Holy Communion. Meaning he would, like, if you read the paper, he would go forward for communion and then come back, and someone would ask him, and I think Pope Matthew as well was giving communion once and asked him this question, but I need to verify that. And they're like, "Why do you come forward and come back every time?" And he's saying, because it's such a holy thing to have Holy Communion. I'm in fear of it, because of his righteousness. And he also said that someone should be like Saint Mary to partake of Holy Communion, meaning like her purity. So it's very, very extreme, which I think makes it a fascinating topic. Divine revelations. I mentioned some of that in the paper. And training himself to be silent. So he was very famous for being persecuted for his silence, that he would be hurt. He didn't die. He wasn't a martyr for his faith, but he was attacked, and I think in that sense he's a confessor. So I detail some of that in the translation. It's very, very extreme examples. And the departure, I think one of the common things between the two figures is that they both had a great love for Saint Mary or the Virgin Mary, and they both departed on a feast day. They had visions of Saint Mary, and I think as well, both of them to show that they had a connection, they had a good relation between each other, is that in Egypt, Pope Matthew, he passed away 4 years after Saint Rueiss, and he made it clear in his will, I want to be buried next to Saint Rueiss in the church. There's a famous church in Egypt for that. And this is the question that I had with the professor Osaka. She said maybe it's a good idea to talk about the role of the monastery of Kandok, like where the church of Saint Rueiss, and the veneration of him, and the process of the consecration of his church. It's a famous church in Egypt, and has a few other patriarchs are buried there, not just Pope Matthew. I think it's five or so. So maybe it's worthwhile going into that as well, but we'll see how we go. And I just talk a bit about Pope Matthew. I didn't finish translating like that manuscript. There's plenty of other manuscripts, but I got about into like page 40 of about 90 pages, and they divided up first half Saint Rueiss, second half Pope Matthew the first. Yeah, I found this picture online when the priest in Egypt was giving a talk on the Pope, and also that, and because they're related, he also mentioned abba. You see behind him the camel, and he gave an interesting story about that. I haven't been able to verify it yet, but hopefully it comes in the manuscript or one of the manuscripts I read. I won't share the story so much now, but it did. I guess the point is they showed that they had good relation, and we can compare the two and show some of the similarities, which hasn't really been talked about before in depth. I'm certainly not in English. If you read the paper, it talks a bit about his early life of monasticism, and I think the most interesting thing is that Pope Matthew, he would keep moving from one place to another. He also became a monk at such a young age and a priest at a very young age, a monk at 14 and a priest at 18, which is like unheard of. Like the general rule for in the Orthodox Church, Coptic Orthodox Church, is like 30 years old to become a priest, and a bishop is like 50. Of course, there's exceptions, and so he was also very righteous. And what's probably more interesting is that he would keep traveling from place to place, from monastery to monastery, and I argue that he did that to avoid vainglory. Papal prophecy, yeah, there's a famous prophecy about that he would be Pope, and you can read that. And he did like an extreme thing, kind of like Saint Rueiss. Fenner read the paper. He cut the tip of his tongue before the ordination, the consecration to become Pope, and that he was restored on the same day. And the same question: why would he do this? It sounds crazy. Why would you cut the tip of your tongue? But again, I would stress to avoid vainglory. But God revealed, and also argue that God revealed his righteousness, just like he did to Abba meaning father, Saint Rueiss. You can read the papacy in your own time, I guess, on the paper. I put bits and pieces of it there. They're both famous because they have a lot of miracles. So in the manuscripts, they mention several miracles, many miracles, both performed by abba and Pope Matthew. And back to the professor in Osaka in Japan, who did some research. He said, I think that she didn't get access to these manuscripts. It's a bit easier when someone's a monk and goes to the monastery and St. Macaris, for example, in Egypt, they're a bit nicer to you, and they don't share it to anyone. So she says, yeah, I respect the decision to not share it, but also I think that some miracles are not covered there. They haven't really been talked about. So you can talk about that in a bit more depth. And we said he was involved in a tumultuous time, because in the 14th century, late 14th century in Egypt, they were under Mamluka rule, which is like they were the time of Muslim persecution. Lots of periods of persecution, but the 14th century was a bit of a heightened period of martyrs in Egypt. And we mentioned the departure, how he made it clear that he wanted to be buried next to Saint Rueiss. And he was the first, as far as I know, the first Pope, Patriarch of Alexandria, the first Pope, not to be buried with like the other patriarchs where they were buried. So he started to, I guess, to go against the trend. I think again because of his humility. And that's just a picture of the tomb in the church in Saint Rueiss, and it just has him there, Pope Matthew the First, and has the dates there. He was the first, and then a few other patriarchs were buried with him after, but he was the first. He was unique in that. Just put the arrow there. So what I hope to do is really to compare and contrast the two, to really show their relation. We mentioned some of the similarities between the two, such as the fasting. They had similar aspects of fasting, and the clothing, extreme aspects of clothing. They both did miracle works, and they're attested in the manuscripts. Gift of receiving visions. Certainly, Abba was famous for his silence. Maybe Pope Matthew not as much, but I think there's a good argument for that too, especially before he was Pope. In his early days, they were both suffered persecution, and both were heavily, criticized, like oppressed. And I argued that they were both fools for Christ. And they both seem to have a love for Saint Mary, and Saint Mary appeared to them. And even when one of the stories is, I don't think I included it there, when the Pope Matthew was in prison, and both Abba was in prison too, so that's another similarity. When Pope Matthew was in prison, and they came to Abba, why don't you pray for him? And he answered like, Saint Mary will get him out. We will get him out. So they both had a love for Saint Mary. And just a bit of the conclusion. This paper argues that Abba rueiss was a glorious example of holiness and a saint and confessor in every sense of the word. Christians should meditate on his life and grasp, in at least some small way, the depths of this saint, especially because he's unknown and a lot of people just think he's just crazy, but I argue he's very righteous. Abba rueiss was destitute, like poor, despised, persecuted, but today his name circles across the world several centuries after his departure to heaven. The amazing thing was that Abba rueiss was not a priest, deacon, or even a reader. In fact, it appears that he was illiterate, yet I argue that everyone can benefit from the saint in modern times. And in addition, this paper argues that Pope Matthew was also a glorious example of holiness and the wonderful picture of God's work in his saints, attested by numerous recorded miracles that he performed in the name of the Lord. He led the church extremely well in a very difficult era of persecution. Both these figures showed some similarities and differences, so I hope to talk about that, but the common spiritual aspects were pivotal to the church during a tumultuous period of persecution. Both revealed that they were saints in their biblical lives. And just some of the manuscripts there. St. Anthony's got St. Anthony monasteries in Egypt. They have quite a few manuscripts, and I thought that's God willing, it's going to be worthwhile. Even one of the manuscripts it has like the eulogy of Pope Matthew the First. I have no idea what's in it, but it looks very interesting. So I've never seen that before, heard of it before. So it gives like a summary of his life, or like they talk about him on his funeral day, which was a big event in Egypt. So that should be good for English speakers. That's just a couple of pictures. That's a picture of the manuscript, and just a picture of the catalog. That's in French, talking about how they're kind of together: life and miracles of Saint Rueiss and Patriarch Matthew. And there's just another picture of some of the manuscripts at St. Anthony's Monastery. That's just the catalog, so it should be worthwhile. I don't know how much how much I'll do, but at least we got one so far, one good manuscript talking about them and to go in further depths. And that's it. Of course,
wow. Sorry.
Go ahead. Of course, any questions or suggestions or whatever.
Yeah, thank you, Father John. So fascinating to be exploring these figures that those of us who are not familiar with the Coptic Orthodox Church tradition and history may not have heard of. I'm particularly interested in your work with the manuscripts and doing your own translation, etc. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit? What challenges have you faced, and what have you learned from that process?
I've learned that it's hard, and I need to learn transliterations. I've never translated anything professionally at all, and my mom can help as well. It's helping as well. So I need to make sure it's a proper translation. Like one of my supervisors, secondary supervisor, Professor Magid Mikhail, he's done like professional work on translating. Like he did the life of Saint Bishoy, and he translated. He helped in translating that from Arabic to English, and he's got like notes on transliterations. So yeah, it's not easy, especially their manuscripts are very hard, so it's hard to read. But some other manuscripts that I have are a lot easier to read. But yeah, the issue is translating accurately, getting the meaning, doing the transliterations. I hope that it's going to come out good, and it needs a lot of revision. And you would know better, like what's the standard for it, especially if anyone read the paper, read the translations. It's you read it, it's like, yeah, you can see the errors; they're very clear. You know, it needs a lot of work. So hopefully we can make it a lot better and to a high level.
Terrific. Can I just ask you to turn off your share screen so that we can?
Yeah, sorry, sure.
Yep. Let's open up to other questions and comments.
I have a question, if it's okay to begin. Father John, thank you. I do enjoy and appreciate when people seek to make scholarship available more broadly, like you're doing, and bringing some people to light that we don't have access to. I wanted to ask a little more just about the manuscripts. Are there multiple attestations of his life, like multiple copies of this? Are they from different time periods? Are you having to compare differences between them, or is there one copy in existence that you're working from?
I'm working on one at the moment, but there's at least, I've got another one. I've got a few others, but there's at least I'm sure there's more than what I listed. Like even Professor Swanson, he wrote, and I'm sure like he wrote in one of his, and he listed some manuscripts. He goes, I'm sure there's more available in Egypt. More copies exist in Egypt, maybe from the Church of Saint Rueiss. So there is multiple attestations, and they and for example, the ones at Saint Anthony's Monastery, they list what they are. Like it says, life of Saint Rueiss. Another one says miracles of Saint Rueiss, and then we'll have life of Pope Matthew the First and miracles of Pope Matthew the First. So how similar would they be? I'm not sure. But at the moment, I'm just working from one, and I guess we'll take it from there. Of course, the more the better, because then maybe you can compare and show some differences. And Professor Osaka said you can even compare some, like for example, some of the miracles are not recorded before. You can compare from one to another. So there definitely looks like there's several manuscripts, and from similar times, not necessarily the same time. Like if you look at the dates of St. Anthony, like when I was looking at the dates, I'll put it actually in the thing. So you have different dates, 1612, 1594, 1834. So there are some similar dates, but there should be plenty of manuscripts around the same topic.
So just to clarify, Father John, so I think you're referring to a number of different manuscripts referring to the same people. But if I'm correct, Brent, you're asking, are there multiple attestations of each manuscript? So, I guess the parallel is to New Testament or Hebrew Bible textual criticism, where you've got, multiple copies of Paul's letter to the Romans, for example, to compare those copies with each other. Do you have that sort of thing going on with these manuscripts?
As far as I'm aware, the answer is no so far. I don't think the copies, I think they're slightly, they're different, like similar, but definitely not an exact copy as far as I'm aware.
Okay, interesting. So that just highlights how rare it is that you have access to these manuscripts.
Yeah, well, it depends also where you go. Like, for example, in Egypt, it depends where you go. It depends who you know. Like in another monastery, they wouldn't let me take anything. They wouldn't let them take any photos. They would say, "Here's the manuscript. You can just study it, okay, and give it back. No photos allowed."
Wow. Okay.
But St. Macarius was very, very welcoming. They let me take as many photos as I wanted.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, Father John, thanks for your presentation. It was very interesting and brought something to mind. I just turned around and pulled this out that I hadn't looked at it, not for, I think, 40 years, called Coptic Egypt, and signed by Shenouda III on 7th of December 1985. I actually met the man. In fact, I met him twice. He was in Australia a few years later, but has absolutely nothing to do with what you're talking about. But I just thought it was interesting. You might like to see it.
Yeah, you're lucky you met that. So that's Pope Shenouda III, the one before the Pope now in the Coptic Orthodox Church. Yeah, that's. I'm glad you got to meet him. That's.
Anyone else have a question or comment for Father John?
Yeah, Father John, I just have a question that's a little bit off of the topic of your paper, but I'm just wondering what you know of the Coptic Church in Egypt now. Is it under constant persecution, or is it growing, shrinking? What's the status there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, the problem is that look, there's always persecution, of course, but I guess there hasn't been, like, as far as I'm aware, like anything major recently. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Sometimes it is undercover. I think the new president's doing a good job. He's definitely calmed down the situation, President al-Sisi. The people tell me that. I don't live in Egypt. They tell me it's calmed down a lot. They like him. Like the Coptic monks, they like it. Most of them, they like him. I think he's doing a good job. He's calming down the situation. Like they play some of the talks that he had. Like one of the talks I had, he played it to me, a monk, and he goes, there's no such thing as Coptic Muslim. Focus on yourself. Like don't try. Like he's trying to, like, calm down the persecution. And look, when I was there, I haven't had any issues. Like even traveling in the city, because obviously I stand out with what I wear, and sometimes they kill priests and monks just because they stand out. It's easy target. But yeah, like I haven't had any issues. And a lot of Muslims. It's very, very, very nice people there. So I think it's calmed down, but I can't say that officially. And even like the percentages of how many Copts in Egypt, they always like lower than what it is. They might say it's like 10 million people. I think there's like 100 million people in Egypt now. But I think it's a lot more than 10 million. It's probably like 30, at least 25% of Egypt is Coptic.
That's great. Oh, thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the update.
Father John, I have a question here for you. How are you?
Of course, go ahead.
Hi. We are from the same church, guys, so we know each other. Okay? So I'm from the Coptic church like him. Father John, is there anything written in the Coptic Encyclopedia of America or any other English encyclopedia about Abba rueiss? If there's any English translation about his life in any encyclopedia?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. Like I haven't even looked at the Coptic Encyclopedia if Abba rueiss is in there. I assume he'll be in the Coptic Encyclopedia. Whether he will be in the American or British, I suspect the answer would be no.
Okay. We'll look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Father John, related to your comments about the contemporary Coptic Church, can you maybe reflect in a little more detail how you think your two figures that you're studying can be an example to modern day Copts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's like asking myself the same question. You said to modern day Copts or to anyone?
Well, maybe first Copts and then anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think from Copts, it stands out that I mean, like there was a quote that I read. I think I put in the paper. Let me get it quickly. It says. So one of the biographers of the manuscript says, "I have to say, and do not lie." So this is obviously it's our translation of the manuscript. That what the martyrs endured from pains, suffering during the time of worshiping idols, this father, referring to Abba rueiss, endured like it or even more of it in our time. So if he lived like many centuries after the big period of the martyrs, we can the Copts can look at it and say he lived like a righteous saint and even was a martyr or confessor many years after. So we can, the cops can look at that and try to do in a small way, whatever that is. If it's fasting, a bit more fasting abstinence, using his example of silence. I think if you read the story, anyone will be affected by it. It's like a bit touching. It also is crazy, and I'm sure many people will criticize it and say he's crazy. This is I don't believe it. So I guess I got to talk about that too. That side that no one would believe that he would do crazy things like that. And Pope Matthew, why would you cut the tip of your tongue before consecration? It's just crazy. But I think when people look at that, the cops look at that as a fool for Christ, they can apply it in a small way, in the abstinence and the fasting and general spirituality. Look into the form of prayers. It's not an easy question to answer, but yeah, I think everyone can learn from that. It makes me feel embarrassed, like as personally as a monk, when I read the story, it makes me feel a bit like embarrassed, like I'm just I'm not even a monk.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just have one question, maybe a suggestion from also Professor Campbell. Do you think it's a good idea to translate so many manuscripts, or would that just get out of hand?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, you're literally dealing with primary texts and putting them in to English for the sake of study. That seems extremely important. But at the same time, you know, the entirety of your research can't be taken up with that. You know, you need a thesis. But I couldn't answer that. But I'm sure your supervisors would have something to say about that. But as you know, this level of research does require us to limit our subject of study so that we can go deep with it. So I guess without really knowing anything about what you're doing, apart from what you've just told us tonight, I guess I would say you probably want to limit yourself to what's going to be directly useful for your thesis. But I would love to see you not only complete your thesis successfully, but perhaps go on to publish your translations and to continue that work of translation so that these manuscripts can be shared by us all.
Yeah, thanks. That's good. I'll ask my supervisor.
Yeah, I think that's the wise response to what I have to say. Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no
Father
further
John, I have one more thing.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Raphael.
Father John, is maybe it's worthwhile that when you write about him to mention that he's been accepted by the church as a saint. So it's not because he's now in the book of our church called the Synaxarium, which is he's an official saint. Okay, it's not just people say about him that he's saint. He's been accepted and been put in the church saintly list. So, and there's a special book for that, which you know about it, which is the Synaxarium.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I mentioned in the paper, I think he's mentioned in like the liturgy, the Coptic Orthodox liturgy, the liturgy of Saint Basil. There's a brief section on that mentioning his name, so we can even explore that. Why his name is there and how it got there. Like that's a good point.
So he's very respected by the whole church. He's not. He said that he's crazy, but not many people say that. A lot of people in Egypt will be upset about you if you say that about him.
That's true. That's true. That's true. But that's true. But also one of the names that he has when he says Teji, that means crazy. So I'm also quoting him.
So be careful. Thank you. God bless.
Thanks, Bob.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Father John. Just fascinating to learn about the work that you're doing. And we wish you well.
Thank you.
As you continue to navigate that. We'll finish a little bit early this evening, folks. I'm sure no one will complain about that. Thanks for gathering together. We meet again on Tuesday April 4th, 6 p.m. And we look forward to gathering then and